free to mingle, talk to each other, and at least some of the time, observe the Zurich Minds rule. And that is, don't talk to anybody you already know.
Well, it is called evolutionary fitness, and I have been living this way for 30 years, so I am a caveman, yes. I developed this approach because, primarily because of my son, of all things, because I'm a father. And my 2-year-old son developed type 1 diabetes at the age of 2 while I was a visiting scholar at the University of Chicago. I went right to the bookstore and learned all I could about metabolism. And then I'd been a lifelong athlete. I was a professional baseball player, and I'm active in many sports. And then I got into this complexity kind of type analysis too in writing my last book on the movie industry called Hollywood Economics. I studied the statistical dynamics of complex systems and the kind of dynamics you have in motion pictures. And the nature of the distributions that you have there are very reminiscent of the kinds of dynamics that are revealed in human metabolism that I had learned about, and that actually hunter-gatherers and wild animals display. There's a certain similarity in the kind of movements and actions. They all fall within the realm of power laws, the kind that DDA has been talking about, and that I have talked about for years in my research. Now this, Nassim has been kind enough to write the afterword on this, and the book will be out in December. I only put this image up because I want to show the timeline. Notice this extends far longer than the typical timeline that we use if you're used to the one from Time magazine and others that are around. We start with amoebas. Actually, before the beginning of oxygenation of the planet, amoebas moved around based on, not amoebas, but bacteria moved around using anaerobic metabolism. Now, what do amoebas do? They chase one another to eat one another, or to escape being eaten. So what they use is the anaerobic pathway, and that is a pathway we still retain even today. All of our fight or flight, most powerful movements elicit the anaerobic pathway. So we retain that, and we have to use it to live a healthy life, in my estimation. Then along here, about 1 billion years ago, comes insulin. It's an ancient, the gene for insulin is very ancient, and it's evolutionarily conserved. All species, right through yeast on up to humans, use the insulin IGF pathway, the insulin-like growth factor pathway. That's the signal of insulin is a signal that corresponds to nutritional abundance and growth, time for having babies and for acquiring fat, building up fat stores in the body. And that is also a signal to the genes. The insulin IGF pathway actually turns down repair and maintenance and prepares the body for reproduction instead. The genes are leaving your soma, moving on. So they turn down the amount of resources that they dedicate to repair and maintenance. So one of the real secrets of the whole approach is simply to restrict the activation of the insulin IGF pathway. Simplest way to do that is to lay off the sugar. Carbohydrate strongly activates it. Of course, your thoughts do, and other things activate the insulin IGF-1 pathway as well, but that's the critical triggering event. And this has been traced through genetic research now, life extension models. Now, the more sophisticated ones argue that life extension, of course, is impossible, but prolonging the period of healthy life is possible, and one way to do that is to not activate the insulin IGF-1 pathway. And C. elegans shows this as well as all other creatures. In fact, the researchers who finally published a recent paper on glucose restriction and tuning down the IGF-1 pathway completely changed their diet as soon as they discovered this. Now, I could have told them that 30 years ago. This is, in fact, the case. From this point, you move forward, and the next event, so far as I'm concerned, is when humans as primates descended from the treetops to the savanna floor. In the treetops, you have three spatial dimensionality. You have to forecast the leaps, the trajectory of three-dimensional leaps. You have abundant fruit, and you have the ability to move among stores of fruit. So our brains actually are glucose-loving brains. The brain's main course is glucose. With the advent of the ice ages and the spreading of distances between trees, the primates descended to the savanna floor. What's scarce on the savanna floor? Glucose. So the human body had to do several things which are with us today. These legacies remain with us today. First of all, muscle had to become insulin resistant because insulin takes glucose and packs it into the muscle, and if it's in the muscle, the glucose-loving brain cannot get it. So insulin resistance evolved along with, what else? Body fat. Humans are fat primates compared to other primates. Thirdly, of course, brain volume expanded dramatically. So the fat and the insulin resistance are both there to protect the brain and to preserve the brain's energy supply. We also became more mobile because we became upright, bipedal. We gave up stomach volume by eating high-density, high-nutrition foods so that we could trade stomach mass for brain mass. That's the expensive tissue hypothesis. So now we have, another thing is the column of blood is vertical standing in a human, so blood pressure mechanisms had to be adjusted as well. And there's a genetic mutation that suggests that uric acid now becomes a participant in maintaining blood pressure. And of course, we see a lot of people who have high blood pressure have an out-of-control uric acid and are very sensitive to salt as well. So that's an evolutionary legacy that still endures. So that was a very important point. And then I will skip over the ice ages for a moment because I want to show you temperature variations regarding the ice ages. Now, the human here is a predecessor. I'm calling this Cro-Magnon, Homo sapiens sapiens, the smart, powerful Paleolithic ancestor that is at least as tall as the tallest of modern living, not the tallest, but is about the same height that was reached just in the last few generations of humans. Except that in the United States, height is actually beginning to decline now. Americans are no longer the tallest nation. The Dutch and Germans have surpassed Americans now. And this is a legacy that began about 50 years ago, right about when fast food was invented in the United States. The nutritional quality is always shown in stature. And American stature is now declining. Of course, it's just a leading indicator. It's going to happen to everyone if they adopt the kind of diet that we're concerned with here. Now, so this human is larger than modern humans for the most part, is far more muscular, has a larger brain, about a 10% larger brain, and is just a superior athlete. The kinds of, the distance between footprints and a variety of other physical feats that can be attributed to hunter-gatherers far surpass what even elite athletes can do today. Now, we are creatures of the Ice Age. You can see the temperature variations that we lived through in reaching the stage where we are now. And in particular, 70,000 years ago, we had the Pinatubo eruption on the Philippines, and we had both an ice age and a volcanic winter simultaneously. Now, just preceding this time, at about 150,000 years, is mitochondrial Eve. This is the mitochondria flowed through a genetic bottleneck, as well as the survivors of this Eve were pruned away. And so all of us basically carry the mitochondrial DNA from our mothers. That is, the mitochondria, which are part of our metabolism. That's what made us able to use oxygen. the fusion of the mitochondria in the nuclear cell took place about 2 billion years ago, and it's a very important fusion. The mitochondria is almost a bacterial-like organelle. It lives inside the nuclear cell, and the two elements, they exchange DNA, so each is hostage to the other. The mitochondria can't leave and survive because it's left some of its DNA there in the nuclear cell. And likewise, the nuclear cell cannot have an adequate supply of energy without the mitochondria being present. Now, the mitochondria create most of the free radicals that come from our metabolism. So we're back to having oxygen as a substance that we have to learn how to tolerate and develop a stress resistance to. And if you don't, the density of your mitochondria can adjust according to your metabolic fitness, your strength, your age, and a variety of other things. But if you lose your mitochondria, if they go into decline, this is a key element of metabolic cascade that precedes aging. And the aged have low mitochondrial density, and their mitochondria don't work very well. So mitochondrial Eve has carried these mitochondria through, and about 5 women who were hunter-gatherers contributed virtually all the mitochondrial DNA that exists in Europe now. They passed probably through this bottleneck around 70,000 years ago, when there are transitions in human behavior toward more complexity. And you can imagine the difficulties of surviving the ice ages. Humans were pushed up against the shoreline. Cliffs in Africa show fish exploitation at least 185,000 years ago, pushed down by the intense cold. And this is thought to be one of the contributions to the development of increased brain size. The rich sources of omega fatty acids, polyunsaturated acids of which the brain is primarily composed. A Y chromosomal atom lives right around here somewhere, and you can see there's an extreme population bottleneck. It's not dated precisely, but it's thought that maybe just a few hundred to a few thousand humans were alive at the end of the depths of the Ice Age, and that we're a radiation from that group of humans. It's not surprising to me that brain size has actually diminished, because the intelligence requirements for surviving the Ice Age had to be prodigious. Plus, they were bigger bodied, so brain development probably continued for a longer period of time during these early humans. So 7 males who got through this population bottleneck have contributed, hunter-gatherer males, not males who were farmers. Hunter-gatherer males have contributed about 85% of the gene pool in Europe as well. 7 males have created the 7 basic haplogroups that exist in Europe today. The last transition then is, so temperature variation undoubtedly had a great deal to do with the fact that humans became very smart, highly cooperative, very social animals, and that they were pushed up against the seashore for much of this time, and had an adequate supply of fatty acids for the brains to develop. So now we have the transition beginning at agriculture, and you see the temperature peaks are beginning to occur now. Now, agriculture has been called mankind's greatest disaster by Jared Diamond, famous anthropologist, archaeologist, a polymath really, does all kinds of things. And you can see it in the skeletons. If you look at the skeletal remains in the burial trenches in the plains of Turkey and other places, you will see increasing loss of bone density. You will see shortening stature. You will see lesions in the bone that speak to tuberculosis and anemia and a variety of other alterations in the health of human beings. It's also thought, by the way, that the whiteness of skin color that many of we modern humans show developed with the advent of agriculture as well, that it's a very recent genetic adaptation among humans. Reasons being, there's a prime requirement for vitamin D if you're in northern latitudes, but there are darker skinned people living in northern latitudes. Agriculture probably made the final push, and that push would come from the increased pathogenic load that comes with people settling in places and living with their animals and living with their waste. And that pathogenic load created a higher requirement for vitamin D. It wasn't available in the food because they had by now switched to grains, and grains were roughly 60% of the total caloric intake of humans. So white skin was the answer, increasing whiteness of skin in order to synthesize vitamin D more effectively. So there's 5 million years of metabolic analysis. And now here's we are now today. Here's a human that is highly adapted to the existing diet that we're all facing. Now, of course, there's high fructose corn syrup in there, which is ruining the liver, and the liver is contributing to metabolic disease that is leading to all these other factors. The brain is smaller now than this person for a number of reasons. The body, the stature is now slightly lower. We have visceral adiposity and a huge amount of fat mass. Why do humans get so fat? I don't think evolution really prepared us very well to have an upper limit on the amount of fat we can store. There are now several humans in the world who weigh over 1,000 pounds. And it would not have been a selective advantage to be incapable of storing excess energy in the form of fat in the Paleolithic environment. And I'll show you, I've simulated that energy environment. What else is going on here? Well, there's chronic smoldering inflammation throughout this person's body. And that's part of what's making him insulin resistant. He is resistant to the action of insulin. So actually, the relationship between adiposity and brain mass is negative. I'm not talking about in terms of the time period now, but the more obese a person is, they tend to have so much inflammation in the brain and so much liver malfunction that they get a kind of encephalopathy that leads to lessened brain mass. So if we go to the next step, here's where my sort of complexity frame of mind comes in. Metabolism really is self-organized. So this is another one of the premises of my approach to these things. Now there are recent findings, and in fact this really says it, metabolism recapitulates biogenesis. Metabolism came first before biological organisms existed. And they exist because of their metabolism, and they fall apart when their metabolism goes bad. So here, there's a number of papers now that have been written on this subject. By the way, metabolism bootstraps itself upward to create amino acids and glucose and all the essentials required for life. The idea is that you have order out of chaos, as Prigogine has told us, and as Scott Kelso, who DDA referenced. The notion is that our dynamics organize our metabolism, and it really comes down to a point of view on the fact that in order to really control your metabolism, you can't really have a command and control approach. You have to sort of let go and do a certain number of things that effectively alter your hormone drives. So you are really you are not what you eat, you are what your metabolism does with what you eat. And so the first thing to attack is do the things that cause your gene expression to give you a healthy metabolism. Most diet and fitness programs are command and control. They're Soviet models. The body is an economy. It's a self-organized, decentralized economy. And just as the IGF-1 pathway is competing between the male and the female in the fetus and the mother, The brain is competing for nutrients with the adipose tissue, the muscles competing for nutrients. Every cell has only its own agenda to fulfill. It doesn't really care about the body itself. There have to be other mechanisms to control rogue cells, but they don't come fundamentally from the cell itself unless it's given an external program. So when you take this point of view, you realize I just made these points, and Rolf told me not to use bullet slides and talk to the slides. Food and action are really information to your DNA. They provide the signals that cause your DNA to express itself in a way that either leads to some kind of coordination and cooperation between the cells, or that leads one particular type of cell to be deprived of nutrients relative to some other type of cell. So what you see is you see Darwinism inside the body as well as outside the body. Organisms compete in a Darwinian fashion. Cells inside the body compete in a Darwinian fashion. Of course, Edelman has shown that neural networks form also in the body, and so your very thoughts positive thoughts are strengthened in certain ways by the reverberation of these neural pathways. So what we have is that instead of homeostasis, remember the human metabolism is usually compared to a furnace or something. Turn the furnace up, burn more energy, eat less, so that your weight is dynamically adjusted as though you had a set point and you were sort of adjusting the temperature, this top-down command and control process. When in fact, there are multiple set points. There is no set point for fat. You can become almost unlimited in terms of adipose tissue. And what we do in following, and I have many followers around the world now, I must say I have subscribers from 115 different countries, and little tribes that have formed, caveman tribes that have formed in New York and London and in Austin, Texas, and in Houston, and so forth. And they sort of follow this approach and encourage one another on. And I'm going to show you the techniques here in just a minute. It's such a relaxed, easy way to live. Now these are the energy dynamics of a Paleolithic ancestor. Here we found a mammoth and got a feast, but it flatlined. Starvation was a very real threat. And you can show that the dynamic system doesn't have an equilibrium unless you have the capacity to eat more than you can expend in energy. So we all have the positive bias to eat what is before us, what is in sight, and to be lazy. Hunter-gatherers laugh out loud when they see anthropologists come and visit their camps, and then they go out jogging. It's insane to a hunter-gatherer because you're wasting energy, and energy is a precious resource. You should either be playing or you should be doing something that's going to contribute to nutrition. But notice the very fractal structure that's involved here. It's because the Earth is a fractal and prey are distributed in a fractal pattern. Okay, and this is the sort of thing Didier and I and Nassim talk about a lot. And energy expenditures also have this fractal pattern to them. There are intense periods in the hunt. There are fight or flight episodes. About 2% of the episodes here account for more than 25% of the energy expenditures simply because they're so intense. So you have fractality, and what else you have here? You have I first discovered intermittent fasting when I worked this out in my computer. Intermittent fasting, of course, is now almost a cottage industry. There are people who do chronic caloric restriction, but intermittent fasting means you eat one day and you don't eat the next, or you eat half of what you would eat one day and you have a feast the next day. You're altering your metabolism. You're changing the signal-to-noise ratio of all of the hormones in your body, and the body adjusts remarkably well. Intermittent fasting is a whole lot easier than chronic caloric restriction and is actually superior. hard to really prove that, but the metabolic measures that they do take shows very clearly. And that's a simple way to do that. Well, here's the selfish brain theory. It turns out is a very active group here in Europe. And they're at Lübeck. So lo and behold, I find there's a vast literature on this subject that I had been sort of reasoning out from an economist's point of view. Because when I was trying to solve my son's problem with diabetes, he was relying on external sources of glucose, injecting insulin. And it was always a balancing act between using insulin, which would store perhaps too much of the glucose and leave too little for the brain, or having so much glucose that his blood sugar was elevated and he had the kind of damage that is caused by elevated blood sugar, glycosylation and other things that happen inside the body. It's a kind of an internal rust, and it's like the way bread turns brown. It's an Amadori reaction that turns